Welcome to Next Round with me, Dale McDermott.
And me, David W. Higgins.
A young Irish look at the economy, politics and society.
Covering home and abroad.
For the thinkers, the dreamers and the doers, this is Next Round. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Next Round. This is a budget special. The budget has just been announced today in the Dáil. Minister Jack Chambers and Minister Paschal Donohoe have announced the various tax spending measures, and at the core of it was an €8.3 billion budget made up of 6.9 billion in spending and 1.4 billion in tax measures. Of course, this is also in the background of the 14.1 billion euro windfall from the Apple tax judgment, 3.1 billion euro from the sale of AIB shares that's planned, and various other elements as well for the budget. So a lot has been announced today, David, and we are just trying to take it all in. And I know we've been digesting and looking over the numbers today. But the first thing I want to start off with is actually the image of Jack Chambers and Paschal Donohoe side by side. Jack Chambers, of course, age 33. He is the youngest minister for finance in more than a century, following his nomination a number of months ago. The youngest, of course, though, being Michael Collins, who was 29 when he was appointed Minister for Finance. But I thought it was an interesting comparison on two major figures now in Irish public life.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when Paschal was young, and he himself has joked that his hair has gone a little grayer in the role. But you know, he continues to do a really stalwart job on all of this. Yeah, I mean, you know, I did the nerdy thing today and didn't actually watch the speeches. I was busy just crunching a few numbers on all of this. I find that the budget, because budgets there's something about the Irish political kind of the mechanics of lobbying and everything, whereby every government is afraid of leaving somebody out. So every budget for the past decade or so, just post the austerity years, has tried as best as possible to give something to various different sectors of society. And it looks like this budget is no different. So take, for example, the idea that you would just give slightly less extra money to people on long-term job seekers vis-a-vis pensions or disability or others. That was never actually requested by Fine Gael, but merely even the suggestion that was happening created chaos in political and economic and kind of commentary circles, whereby, oh no, that's unfair, it's pitting one group against each other. I mean, this was big on a lot of the Sunday radio shows. It was just an idea. It was never actually lobbied for by any of the three government parties, but it goes to show that these budgets have become an attempt to try and bring everybody together, bring everyone along for the ride. And the ride is an economy which continues to boom, continues to be very hot, continues to have really strong employment growth. And this is another budget which is probably only going to prop things along a little bit higher. Now, if global trends turn against the Irish economy and you have a downturn, then we can at least say that a budget that has a bit of stimulus in it isn't a bad thing. But the more likely scenario is that this is going to continue to lead to a lot of extra jobs growth. Mm-hmm. Disposable income in the Irish economy is probably going to continue to be quite buoyant. And in the round, look, I think overall a good budget.
Yeah, look, I think it's a budget that really has no losers. I was trying to think who actually lost out in this budget, and unless you found someone, David, but I can't see anyone who was really a loser in this. And I think on that macro context, that both ministers were at pains to talk about, where we've come to now as a country, reflecting on the challenges of the pandemic, the challenges of inflation, and how these external factors have had such an impact on the internal economy as well. Almost a comparison to how some of the budgets were announced back during the financial crisis, where it was external factors and shocks which affected decisions as well. But some points which I thought were quite interesting were Pascal Donoghue made this point that life expectancy is now 82 years in Ireland, the sixth highest in the EU. 116,000 new homes since 2020, and a record number of people in employment, 500,000 more than just before the pandemic started in 2020. So I think some interesting points there, and I think what I want to do now, David, is just run through some of the major points on the budget, which I think are important to call out. The first piece, I think, is around cost of living. This was a 2.2 billion euro package overall. Welfare as well made a big part of this budget as well, with the weekly social protection payments increasing by €12 each, including the state pension, €400 lump sum payment for working family payment recipients. 2 double child benefit payments will be held in November and December at €280 per child. October double bonus as well for those who are in receipt of long-term social protection payments. Turning to tax, income tax package was worth about €1.6 billion. USC cut, so the entry level for the new 3% rate increased by just over €1,500 to €27,000. Inheritance tax, this is a big one which was signalled and lobbied on, in particular on the Fine Gael side, and with the increase in property prices over the last number of years, that threshold has now increased from €335,000 to €400,000. There's almost like a mansion tax, I think, which has been created. Properties worth over €1.5 million will now pay 6% stamp duty. And then turning to housing was quite prominent in this as well, where the Department of Housing was to be allocated €7.8 billion, including €2 billion for the construction of 10,000 social homes. Health, of course, made another prominent piece on the allocation of spending, an additional €2.7 billion to be given to health over the next 2 years, with some language being used on governance and ensuring there's almost like a professionalization of spend, probably in reference to the fact that it's consistently overspending itself significantly. On excise, so the good old fun pieces of life, alcohol, cigarettes, and vaping. 1 year increase to excise duty on a packet of 20 cigarettes, which brings the cost to €18.05. And a tax is being introduced on vapes as well, which will now bring the price of a disposable vape to $9.23. No increase on alcohol excise duty. And then just to round us out a little bit here, obviously much more, but just want to call out the highlights. On public transport and infrastructure, this was a €3.9 billion package. Free public transport is now being extended to all children under the age of 9. And there's going to be a €3 billion bundle for infrastructure, including water and energy. Irish Water getting part of that as well. So, I think, David, there's a lot in there. I've some reflections as well, which I want to call out in particular, but what are your headlines which caught your eye?
Well, amongst some of the tax changes, I think the bit around capital acquisition, which is inheritance, but then the piece around a mansion's tax, I think that was a clever move by the government to effectively try and neutralize the effect in some way. Now, not to Not to say that one counters the other equally, but the argument around inheritance tax is that someone's home is something that has already been taxed. Yeah. But that inheritance tax kind of taxes it a second time. Well, then if you're going to reduce inheritance tax, you're at risk of leading to some perpetuation of wealth inequality over the generations, right? Which is where people can pass assets to their kids and kind of perpetuate their wealth in a way that sustains quite very large and wealthy estates. But the idea, I think, with the mansions tax, because it's at 1.5 million of a threshold where it's going to leap to 6%. So over 1 million, it's 2% currently. Below 1 million, it's 1, but above 1.5, it's now going to be 6. That's going to hit a lot of reasonably wealthy householders who, when they sell either a second or their main property, they're going to be hit above the 1.5 at 6%, and that's going to be significant gain for the state actually from property, which is quite a bold move. There's also supposedly a second reason for that tax coming in, which relates to the bulk purchases of properties. Now, the level at which bulk purchases of houses are still happening is heavily disputed. But one of the claims is that the data that we have out there on transactions is actually miscounting the number of bulk purchases, that when the legal documents go through for a purchase, that it's purchasing, let's say, 100 houses together as one transaction. But really, they should all be individual ones. And yeah, I think what I've seen said is that by imposing this extra higher band of stamp duty, that you're going to force people to actually individually register each transaction separately. Because if you don't do that, you're going to be paying 6% on the majority of the transaction. Whereas if it's all individual ones on each individual house, then you'll pay the lower stamp duty on them. So I think it's probably going to that might help some of the issues that have been suggested around the accuracy we have of our data on housing transactions.
Yeah. And what was the other thing you wanted to call out?
Well, I guess it was just that was just around how I think that the inheritance tax issue is kind of countered by the mansions tax. I think it's bold. I mean, some of the other things. I think around income tax. This is an issue that I was looking at throughout the afternoon, trying to just crunch. How people are actually gaining or not from the income tax changes. I think that the way we're measuring this is slightly off. So firstly, to say the Department of Finance are actually really good on budget day. They've published 12 different examples of people, situations of householders, and how they're benefiting from the budget.
Yeah.
I've thrown them all up on Twitter if people want to go and see which example might be closest to you. But they're examples of, like a working couple with kids, and the kids are getting extra double payments, a child benefit, and there's childcare supports, and all these things are factored in, electricity credits, and it'll spit out what the euro gain that family has gotten. I just took a very simple example and plugged in a standard PAYE worker, just a single, no kids, 50,000 euros. But I plugged something else in that isn't in the Department of Finance's numbers, and I plugged in wage growth, because wage growth in the Irish economy was 5.5% up to Q2 of this year. And when you plug in wage growth, what you're saying there is that people are working the same job, but because the economy is booming, people's wages have gone up, but that is also to account for inflation. And then the question I asked is, well, what percentage tax are those people paying? What's their effective tax rate? And I found that the example I took of around 50,000, people were paying about 22% of their take home of their take home pay was being, or sorry, they were taxed at 22, and then they had take home pay, but that was their effective tax rate on last year's income at the old budget. But on this year's higher income, because these people will be earning an extra 3K or so, apply the new tax bands, which, yes, tax bands are higher, the USC has been cut, apply all of those things, the same percentage I got out was 22%. So those people have had a gain in euro terms. There are when you plug what the Department of Finance tell you, these people might be up like 900 euros per year. However, as a percentage of your base pay, there actually isn't a benefit. So those people have, yes, moved up. The bands have gone up, but so have people's incomes.
Mm-hmm.
That's the point I'm trying to make here.
Interesting. So it's almost that if you actually don't get as high of an increase in your wages, um, you might fare better.
Yeah, the people who, yeah,
That's
that's probably the
basically it,
best way
right?
of putting it. Yeah, yeah. So the people who've done best out of this budget might be people who just by chance haven't gotten much of a pay
Yeah.
increase this year. Now, I don't want to create the impression that it doesn't work. You don't get benefits from earning higher incomes. You do for sure. What I think this comes down to is just the messaging.
Mm.
We have this kind of template that we have in budgets, where every budget, because we've had basically no inflation for best part 4 decades, we like to say what people gain in euro terms.
Mm-hmm.
What we should be more accurately doing is saying what people gain in percentage terms. Has people's tax burden gone up or down? And actually, this is kind of a standstill. Now, I'd have to look at some other examples. What it's like at higher end? What's it like at the lower end? Lower end looks like it's probably been a gain, and that's because of the extra social welfare payments. Eamon Ryan has shared a chart which was really useful, which is looking at the change in disposable income by decile. And people at the lowest incomes look like they've really gained a lot from this budget.
Yeah.
And there's extra things I haven't mentioned as well. If you've got kids, you get the extra child benefit payments. The electricity credits are also great. So in the round, there's real gains from this budget. I'm just getting very, I think, kind of precise on some of the income tax stuff,
Yeah.
and noting that as a percentage, it's not as strong as it might seem.
And certainly on the on a lower income basis, 2,000 increase in the standard rate cutoff point. Small increase in the main tax credits as well. But one of the things I noticed as well, David, I was also looking at the those 12 examples which were included in the budget documents, and one of the things which really comes clear is the amount of one-off measures which have been announced in this budget as well. And from the 250 euro in electricity credits, the double payments on child benefit, those who are all on long-term weekly welfare schemes. There's the 400 euro working family payment lump sum. There's the 300 euro fuel allowance lump sum. There's a lot of one-off payments, and they're all paid in winter of this year as well, which I think
Yeah.
good timing for a budget if one was to be cynical, good time for an election
Yeah.
if one was to be cynical. But I think a heavy focus on social welfare payments. Now, both ministers were also at pains to talk about in their speeches that how a country treats those who fare and are doing less well off in a society is a measure of those countries and those societies. And they were, really kind of trying to, bring home the point that there's a duty of care for a country that's doing so well to ensure that everyone is being lifted up as well. So, but it is clear that there's been a big focus this year, I think, on social welfare and social welfare increases.
Yeah, and in the round, as I was saying, by that deciles analysis, this is a progressive budget, and it follows a long line of budgets which have tilted in that direction. Most of the subsequent budgets have given proportionately more
Mm-hmm.
as a percentage to the lower deciles than they have the upper. I mean, that chart that I mentioned, I might just read out some of the numbers on it. So this is change in weekly household disposable income due to budget 25. If you're in the lowest decile, you're up 4.2%. If you're in the highest decile, you're only up 1.4%.
Mm-hmm.
If I take something like the mid 5 and 6 deciles, it's 2.2. and the average person is up 2.3. So it's bang in the middle and two. So the bottom half of society, you know that phrase you used about it being a measure of our society, about how we treat the poorest, this budget very much fits that mold. I think this also speaks to just the political angle here as to, you know, what are the re-election chances for the government off the back of this? And look, there's people who will never vote for the two big parties and will always be voters that vote either Sinn Féin, centre left, PPP, all of that kind of stuff, or always vote independent. But if there's a play for, all swathes of Irish society in this budget, the three government parties have gone after that, because if the all the hearsay, the kind of the social media chatter, all those, that government is only for the rich, well, the budget here clearly demonstrates a tilt that is very much towards lower paid people, not even middle, or not, certainly not upper income people. I mean, a mansion's tax is not the sort of thing you do while looking for votes amongst the higher earners.
Yeah, and like even some of the other stuff that I'd say is kind of more relevant for day-to-day living costs that families will face, such as public transport. So free public transport now being extended to all children under the age of 9. I think that that's a real tangible cost saver. If you have a family of 3 kids all under the age of 9, that's a cost, right? Free school books up to Leaving Cert level. School books every year can be a significant cost to families. And again, if you have multiple kids in the education system, you might be dreading a return to school, a time frame where you have to buy all these new books. If I recall, when I was in school all that time ago, school books were on, like you had to have the latest edition, the 3rd edition, the 4th edition, the 5th edition of a textbook that didn't really change much, but it changed some of the graphics maybe, or some of the content was changed pages. So really, to actually follow on in school, you had to get the latest edition. Those are real costs, right? Because books can be pretty expensive, and exam fees as well for junior and Leaving Cert also to be waived. And the other piece as well, just to round out this as well, was one of the other pieces that both ministers were driving home was around children and childcare, child health, child welfare, and the hot meal program as well is to be expanded to all primary schools next year, which I think is another sizable impact for the cost of having kids.
Yeah, that's really welcome. I'm speaking to an audience tomorrow actually on the topic of how the budget benefits young people, and I think everything you've mentioned there, stacks in favor of supporting young people. You things like the renter's tax credit as well. Young people typically tend to rent. Help to Buy will be extended until 2029. And just going back to the schools, so another issue that was big at this budget was the capitation grant. That's the money that is given to schools to just run their schools. So I actually was doing a bit of work for a client in the primary school sector, whereby they wanted the issue of costs of running a primary school to be looked at. And I didn't, before I got into that work, appreciate how costly running a primary school has become. So because a lot of the costs in running a school are light and heat, that makes up about 14% of the cost of a school's budget. Whereas for an ordinary household, there's only about 7, so it's about half of the cost. And because some of those costs have more than doubled, that means that the capitation grant has actually been totally inadequately covering the cost of running a school. So you've heard stories around the country of a lot of school principals having to cut back on other programs or to get extra fundraisers going. And it looks like there has been, I haven't found the number yet, but it looks like there will be an increase in the capitation grant this year. And the easing of energy bills this year looks like that'll be some help to those schools as well.
Another thing which I noticed as well was just around justice and defense. So about 3.9 billion euro has been allocated to the Department of Justice, which includes a provision for the recruitment of about 1,000 further Gardaí and 350 prison officers. Small increase in defense forces, about 400 being increased. So, but just thought that was noteworthy as well. One thing I think, David, that is. Oh, and then also, sorry, one more thing just to call out as well, which again, if you're thinking about like real costs for having kids or young people in your family, the cutting of college fees. So the student contribution has been cut by €1,000 now to €2,000, which again is a welcome measure, I'm sure, for many families across the country.
Yes. When I hear numbers of increase in Garda numbers, there was commentary today about this being kind of a Bertie budget, or a have when you spend it kind of
I thought of
budget.
that as well, actually.
Yeah, and actually the one thing that actually makes me think of that time in Irish politics is actually references to more guards on the street, more nurses, more teachers, because that to me was actually the bigger promise that would have come through that. So back during that era, you would have had Bertie and Enda Kenny with the Mullingar Accord and the Labour Party to lick it up. Each of those parties was trying to just outbid each other on the number of guards they could get and the number of teachers and all of that. But what's remarkable about this, it feels like I'm not saying that we're in the Bertie world, i.e. that we're going to end up with a crash and we're going to end up with a totally eroded tax base, because I actually think that, like, as I've explained, that the income tax changes look like they don't erode at least the income tax base. The corporate tax base is going to do what it does far beyond our own control, because it's down to the US House of Congress as whether they'd like to shut us off at some point to all the corporate tax revenue. The comparison I'm seeing is just more around the narrative that the economy's in a good place, and we're heading into an election, and that's where a lot of that comes from. I don't think it is based on I don't think it should be seen as a similar prediction that we're headed into something dark around the corner. Things might slow down into next year. That's very possible. But big crash ain't coming, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, even if there is to be, the big piece around this as well is the budget has been constructed on not tying expenditure to windfalls, which and speaking of windfalls, one of the pieces which has been punted to Q1 of next year is what to do with all this money, right? So the value of the Apple tax judgment proceeds is €14.1 billion. And the Minister Chambers said that they really want to make best use and get the best outcome for this amount, and that four main pillars have been determined as where they want to have a focus point, which is water, electricity, transport and housing are the four main pillars, and coordinating it with the National Development Plan, which is already in place as well. So total capital expenditure next year will be 15 billion, the highest ever, and housing playing a prominent piece of that. But in terms of like what the breakdown looks like, and what kind of special projects are they going to realize, the jury is still out on that, and I think we'll have to wait until, if we do think that there'll be an election on this side of Christmas, I can only imagine that'll play a significant part of any election campaign, which is, where is this money going to go and how will it be spent?
Yeah, specific projects aren't typically the sort of thing you get out of a budget day anyway. So we have to just wait and see. And really, because we're heading into election, it's going to be down to, which of the different parties outline different priorities, right? So, you mentioned the split of focusing on the grid, on water, on all of that.
Yeah.
If all the political parties have different promises in terms of the focus they're going to put on each of those, it's going to then be in the next program for government where they're going to have to kind of meet in the middle on that. And then you'll end up with something, in between. I'm interested. It's remarkable to see how some of the discourse now is talking about Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil on their own in the next government without the Greens or without any other party, which is a discourse that I couldn't have predicted even 2 years ago. I mean, I've had a long-standing uh, my bigger long-standing prediction really for the election was that we'd end up going Dutch. No one party would have more than 20-25%, and you'd end up with large 3-4 party coalitions that would take months to form. We could end up with something. We could end up with a new government by Christmas. Being honest, that is now on the table. But what will be interesting is, will some of the green legacies hang on? So I'm thinking of things like the public transport split, whereby 2/3 has to be given to public transport versus roads. I mean, I'm following a bit of a trope here, but Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael really love spending on roads so much that they'd end up going back to maybe a 50-50 split or something like that. That's kind of to be determined.
And I think there's probably like a national recognition, I think, that our transport infrastructure across the country, when you compare it to our European colleagues, we're just not at the races at all. I think there's a general acceptance now that the country needs to play catch up on its public transport infrastructure.
Yeah, and people gripe about things like bike lanes and that kind of stuff, but I mean, taking cars off the road by giving people alternatives is so important. And like, if you're building metros and Lewis's, that's also in that same realm. And it looks like taking the cars off the quays here in Dublin has been a success, that has actually lowered transport times and has just cleared up the place a fair bit. So there's stuff in that so-called green agenda that is probably going to stick around because it's being seen to quote unquote work, and will be something that the two big parties might take into the election as well.
Yeah. One of the other pieces I saw was around employees can now receive a bonus top up to €1,500 as well. So getting a bit of a gift in recognition of performance and life events was a piece that the minister called out, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, just on that, I was surprised to pick up over the years of chatting to friends and colleagues how relatively popular that is. That a lot of employers will give things like a one for all voucher, right, up to, as a kind of a bonus, and it could be 1,000, but now it could be 1,500, and it's totally tax free. So the employee benefits the employer, feels like they're doing something good, because every employer finds that they're putting through their payroll for their employees, and half of it's getting cut off in tax. So they can give something to their employees that is totally tax free. That's something that's quite good, and it's quite a boost to discretionary spending as well, because it tends to be something that, like a voucher, that can get spent.
Yeah, and look, one of the things that I wanted to say today was around, there were some nice green shoots I saw in messaging where I saw Ireland for the first time in a while being quite worldly and benchmarking itself in terms of what other countries have been doing on this. For example, take the example we just gave. Pay for performance has been a philosophy in HR and compensation thinking more recently, and businesses are starting to bring in pay for performance mentality into their business practices. So incentivizing that, I think, is a good thing. There were other elements that I saw as well. It was nice to see with respect to angel investors. So they amended the capital gains tax relief targeted at angel investors, where basically they would increase the lifetime limit on gains from currently €3 million to €10 million. Now, that was announced earlier on this year, but it was nice to see it actually in the budget document, and it will be commenced shortly. For scaling businesses as well, they announced new relief for expenses incurred in connection to a first listing on an Irish or European stock exchange, subject to a cap of €1 million. So again, incentivizing businesses to think big and scale and grow. I think was interesting. Probably a lot more they can do, but again, it's nice to see us kind of moving in that direction. I'm disappointed that we didn't see more stuff on investing. We've spoken before, David, about the different tax treatment between stocks and shares and ETFs. But it's nice to see us kind of moving forward, I think, in a bit more of a 21st century mentality on how we view business and investing.
Yeah, it looks like that change might have to wait until another budget, which is a shame. When thinking about supporting business, I mean, the one of the loudest calls into this budget was from the hospitality sector, and was around the 9% VAT rate, and that didn't go ahead despite a supposedly decent push by Junior Minister Peter Burke. But I've argued on this show before that policy is best kept until a rainy day. And I know the restaurant industry would say that rainy day is here, but as long as employment has actually been ticking upwards and hours worked is ticking upwards, and look, with the extra disposable income that is now coming through from this budget, especially the extra welfare payments into the winter months, I think that's going to be money in the pocket that will end up getting spent in hospitality businesses across the country. So that is its own help to that sector. And I would take the view, wait and see if significant job losses emerge and business closures. That will be the time to deploy the 9% rate. So I think the right call was made there. And you got to remember that 9% rate includes a whole bunch of other businesses that may not be struggling. Things like fast food outlets, takeaway places. There's a particular type of restaurant that is struggling right now. And better targeted supports are the right thing to do, I think, instead of the across the board cut. So I think that was the right call.
No, definitely agree with you on that as well. One other area which it stood out to me, and it wasn't exactly, it's not a policy announcement, but it's a commitment to look at it, which is around physical activity. And this all relates to basically should sport and fitness centers, basically gyms, should they be tax deductible? So should your gym membership be tax deductible and allow you to claim it as an expense? So the minister, he announced that he's instructed officials to develop proposals for next year's budget, but this is something which I know Malcolm Byrne in Fianna Fáil has been campaigning for a while, and I often think prevention is better than the cure, and whatever we can do to incentivize people to actually get fitter, if that means incentivizing it by making a gym membership a tax write-off, so be it. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear as to whether that would also include kind of wider sets of memberships, like sports clubs, running clubs, something like that.
Yeah.
It's good. I mean, that's a way of just incentivizing people to get out and join things, because suddenly, if you're a marginal rate taxpayer, suddenly, okay, half of the cost of it has just been cut off. It almost insane.
I wonder then, will it extend to like golf clubs and tennis clubs and social clubs?
Yeah, that's just
dodgy.
Yeah, just got to be careful with that. I mean, it would be a massive boom for a whole bunch of clubs around the country. Just coming off the back of, as well, all the capital grant allocations for different sports clubs around the country. That is all. Those clubs are already benefiting from that. They'd also get a turbocharge from this kind of thing. But I am just thinking of a phrase that my dad says, right? And it's the person who sees a discount and goes crazy and buys a bunch of stuff, and then comes home to the missus and says, "Hey, look at all the money I saved."
Yeah.
So just it does involve people actually spending more money. I'm wondering, that's just the only thing.
Is that him quoting a live example?
Yeah. I think so. Probably, yeah. I'll say it was one of my brothers.
Exactly. Yeah. But I think let's just shift the gear slightly, David, to now how all of this plays into the backdrop of the upcoming election, whenever it will be. Sinn Féin were out quickly as well. And some of their messaging has been around where Pierce Doherty said that your job is not to spend money, it's to get results. And I think this is the line that they're going to after, where yes, you can spend all this money, but are you actually getting value for money, and are you getting the results as a result of that? They honed in on housing, where he said that home ownership has collapsed under Fine Gael. For young people, there are 100,000 less people under the age of 40 that own their own home today than when Fine Gael took office in government 14 years ago. Speaking as well about immigration, and also saying that the government was raising a white flag on housing, but failed to increase the targets on home building today. Something I noticed actually as well was, are we being ambitious enough on housing? Once again today, I don't think we are.
Yeah, look, I think Sinn Féin have done a good job at expressing a lot of the angst that's out there. So take the Leinster House bike shed, not an issue that's going to change us suddenly into a budget deficit, but it's something that really gets to people, and especially when you stack up then the Children's Hospital and other areas that we've really misspent on. There's an expression there of genuine frustration that's out there. But I think when voters go to consider the options in the next election, they are going to be faced with a Sinn Féin and opposition parties who want to significantly do more on spending. Whatever this government has done, they want to do more. And I suppose the question is, are voters willing to say, okay, yeah, we'll have that more spending from the opposition with which comes with certainty, but with an uncertainty over whether they can deliver it more efficiently, or the certainty of the current government now spending relatively less of your money, but with some inefficiency along the way. I think it's gonna come down to kind of a better the devil come the election, that the opposition are actually going to struggle there. Because, if there was a party out there that was saying, we're going to spend less of your money, there isn't. But if there was, that would be something that you'd say, oh gosh, yeah, that could well lead into some of the government support. I'm thinking of the Progressive Democrats in the 1980s. And I'm not, by the way, calling for necessarily something like that. But that's the kind of the setup we have now. We've got two parties and the Greens who have spent a reasonable amount of money, and an opposition who want to notch it a whole bunch higher.
Yeah, it's I go back to the starting point where I said, is there a loser in this budget? And I've found it hard to find one. But I wonder now, David, if we're betting, when do we think the election is going to be?
I think it will be before Christmas. I think it looks like the political parties are so well set up for one. Leinster House is supposedly a bit of a ghost town now, with a lot of TDs going back to their constituencies. Posters are being printed, leaflets are being printed left, right, and centre, especially the government side. Or candidates are selected, manifestos are written. I think if the government tries to hold on, there's going to be such pressure to go that it'll just lead to the government collapsing. So I think it's coming.
That's
I think
a good
it's coming
point, actually,
where
it's because it's a three-party government at the end of the day. Like they'll want to be an ordinary, a orderly wind down of the government effectively, and the longer you keep it going, the more risk of that not taking place, probably, which can kind of get messy, I think. But there's also the piece around, if you look at the government as well, especially Fine Gael as well, given where they are on the poll right now. I'm reminded of the Gordon Brown situation back in 2009, when he, 6 months in, polling very well, and bottled it at the end of the day. Decided not to go, and that was a fatal decision for him as Prime Minister, and it allowed him to not be re-elected. So I think all the signs are there. Ivan Yates was also made the point recently that in the last 3 elections, the main government party that have held the election in February, they've been pretty much hammered, or to borrow Enda Kenny's phrase, dealt a wallop, and given a wallop. And I think probably now the signs are, I would agree with you that we're probably very much in election territory now, and I think they'll probably just get the finance bill. I think it's being published next week, which I think is quite quick. Guillotine that through the Oireachtas and then go for an election.
Yeah, I expect that too. I mean, thinking of your example of Gordon Brown, there's also the counter example of Rishi Sunak.
Mm.
And Sunak went early but wasn't able to win.
I suppose the problem with Rishi Sunak is, though, he was looking for he was given one bit of good news in the first time in months, which was inflation had reached below 2%, and but of course that just wasn't enough to stem the challenges that the Conservatives faced. But one last question, Dave, before we go. Look, this was a budget of good news for many people. Do you think it'll actually shift people's thinking on polling? Will this move the dial a bit more for Fine Gael? Will it decrease it for Sinn Féin? Or do you think it won't make that much of a difference, given the fact that everyone is very basically a winner?
Yeah, I think it's going to be, these budgets have kind of proven themselves in the past not to matter hugely.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're going to get into an election where anything can happen, where Sinn Féin could tick back up a bit, could tick down a hell of a lot further, where the centre-left parties could have a bit of a renaissance. The lessons from the last year election are that trip-ups happen. I mean, housing was a major problem. Mm-hmm. You also have this issue of, who's the outsider? If it's Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, and Sinn Féin, 3 big parties, and we've seen them being the 3 big parties. The last election is Holly Cairns going to come along? Is some other is the Labour leader going to come along and say, actually, you know what, I'm an alternative that you guys haven't considered? So I think that the budget will be very quickly forgotten.
Yeah.
And we'll be back to ordinary politics.
Okay. Well, on that note, we are out of time. So again, thank you everyone for listening and for watching. If you did like this podcast, please like it, please share it, and please subscribe to it. We're available on all major podcast platforms. Also available on YouTube, where you can watch us and subscribe to us. David, you are in Dame Street. Do you want to give us a show of your view? For those who are actually watching, David is in downtown Dublin and has a lovely view. He's showing me around of Dame Street from that's the WeWork, David, is it?
Yeah, so this is the WeWork on Dame Street. It's the old central bank building, and they recently converted it just this year and launched it, and I managed to get a booth right by the window where you could overlook all the hustle bustle of the city.
Very good.
So yeah, those of you watching on YouTube can see what I just showed.
Okay. Thanks a lot, everyone, and take care. We'll see you next week.